Good morning, happy Friday, and welcome to Career Launch Live. I am very excited to not only have Alan Ibbotson with me, but the wonderful, the precious Max. Welcome.
Yes, Max is a little needy again this morning. Sorry, Catherine.
I have one right by my feet, so do not worry.
Okay. I think we all understand this one at this point, right? Yeah.
This is all part of the new normal.
Yeah, exactly.
So how are you this morning, first of all?
I am doing just great, actually. How are you doing, Catherine?
I'm fantastic, and good morning to everyone, including Miss Tara,
Hi,
who's checking us
Tara.
out this morning. I'm good, and I'm very excited about this subject. So I love to fire people, Alan. Don't act like this is a surprise.
Well, I heard you like to hire people actually more than fire people.
I do.
So,
I prefer to hire them, but I also enjoy firing the ones that really
okay.
deserve it. So first of all, for anyone listening who doesn't know you, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. So I'm a changeologist, which means that I help people with change, whatever that means for them, and making that change sustainable, right? Because change is hard, and it requires habit, persistence, and changing routines and discipline, and reframing things, and getting support and alliances. So I look at that sort of holistically, so that people can kind of like make the changes that they want to make at work for themselves and for their teams and for their organizations. And of course, I work as an executive coach as well.
And we're also very grateful that you do, because now executives will be better humans, which we're very excited about. and it's hard to be an executive. I want to hit on that. So before we dive into that, I want to acknowledge that being in leadership at any level is very difficult.
It is.
To be good at it. It's not easy.
No.
What are some of the things that you think make somebody really stand out on the good side
as an executive
about being a leader? Yeah, as an executive leader.
I think it's an answer that probably most people expect me to say, and that's because I say it a lot, and I think it's true, and that is really around their emotional intelligence and their ability to, handle conflict, tricky situations, be brave. I think leaders who are brave, particularly around sensitive situations and know how to handle that, are the ones that really stand out. Like, I just saw a video of Scott Galloway, for instance. I think you may have saw that video as well, where he was on stage at South by Southwest and, was challenged about the fact that he'd, done some dressing in women's clothing. And it was challenged by the father of a transgender kid to sort of say, hey, this is not helpful, specifically in, I guess, the way that Scott was doing it. And so when challenged very directly in the public square on film, he handled it beautifully and just stood and thought for a minute and said, okay, I'll stop.
Which is the best. I was so flabbergasted to see that.
Yeah, it was awesome. And then he did a really great interview afterwards talking, about it. And I think what he was demonstrating was the other thing that I think is important for executives to stand out is their ability to learn. We're in evolving times, right? We've been through so many revolutions. I think we're in the middle of a professional revolution right now, and a societal revolution, and a cultural revolution, and there are multiple revolutions probably going on all at the same time, and so
I think so.
That makes it even harder to be an executive and to be, a leader. And listen, I'm not having a pity party for leaders. They get paid the big bucks for a reason, right? Which is,
right.
To take care of us all and to run their organizations and create great environments for people. But
it's not easy.
It's
hard.
It's easy.
Yeah, it's freaking hard. It is. And I've been a leader in other people's organizations. I've led my own, and it's hard. It is not easy. And I love it. I love every second of it. And I wouldn't trade it. But I wanted to take a minute before we dive into firing the a-hole to acknowledge how hard it is and all the things that can be done right. And your post was brilliant about that, because it just, what a perfect example. Even called out on the stage and handled it well. I mean, that's tough.
Yeah,
it would be very easy to just dismiss that, to shut it down. And he didn't. He embraced it. And
I'm sorry, Catherine, I didn't mean to
No,
interrupt.
you're fine. You're fine. I was just gonna say, I think that being um able to say, okay, we're not doing the best, or I'm not doing the best, let's pivot, or I need to pivot, is one of the things that really sets apart good from great.
Yes. Otherwise, you can end up in the, the emperor has no clothes syndrome. So, right?
Yeah,
So because
absolutely.
it's lonely at the top. Let's say you're a CEO, or somebody at the top of a division in a large organization. It can be lonely there because people are often afraid to speak truth to power.
It's true.
There's always politicking, no matter what anybody says. There's always politics in an organization, and people are always concerned about their careers and their livelihoods, and their next promotion, and so on and so on and so forth. That is natural. We're not going to stop that, and of course that enables some of the toxicity that we see, and we'll probably talk about in terms of the talented but toxic people that we're talking about firing, but I think if you can be the kind of leader who is both courageous in dealing with that behavior, demonstrating that, then you're also, by definition, creating an environment, or partially creating an environment, there are other things as well, that will enable people to come to you when faced with that behavior.
I
So
agree.
you won't be the last person to find out, which is
Right.
really where the problems start, right? It's when the most senior people who have the power to do something are the last to find out. The classic one where you've got a leader who, an executive or anyone really, a senior individual contributor who kisses up and kicks down, right? This is very common. So
Yes, it is.
yeah. And so
Yeah.
the leader only sees the kissing up. They don't see the kicking down. Right?
Some selective vision there too, I think.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Also, just somebody who very carefully manages their environment so that their boss doesn't see the other side
Yes.
of the coin, right? And only sees them at their best.
And that is the first type of a-hole that I want to discuss today. That is the first type, because those guys are everywhere. They are everywhere. To me, they're the most prevalent. You're going to see all the great stuff, but as soon as something bad happens, I'm going to make sure that your focus is on someone else, and that none of my bad behavior ever hits your radar. And those guys are super sneaky, and they come in all forms, right? So it can all be about performance. It can be about the crappy things that they're saying to their coworkers. For instance, I had to deal with a situation at one point with one of my clients where we had a guy who started making a lot of racial and LGBTQIA and women jokes that were not flattering or appropriate for the workplace. And he only said them when certain people were around. No managers, no team leads, no executives. Was very, very so he knew. That's the other thing, is he knew. It's not like he didn't know that it wasn't okay. This guy knew and was doing it anyway.
Yeah.
What would you do with that?
Fire his ass.
So as soon as you find out, just immediately gotta go.
Knowingly doing that, they're just bullying, and that's just not okay. And it should be easy to point to values, to the better examples that are set elsewhere. I mean, this should not be difficult.
No.
I mean, I would probably issue a very stern warning first, to say, if this doesn't stop immediately, we'll be having a very different conversation.
Right.
But no, I would not put up with that. And I think it's important for people to see that, right? To see that you're willing to do that.
Yes.
And that you won't tolerate it, because there's only one thing worse than an asshole, and that's the people who tolerate and enable the assholes, because
they're actually kind of the worst.
They're the
worst.
Who, not to blame them, but to blame them, they also don't do enough to, weed them out. Like, if you're
Mhm.
You know, by definition, more senior, you have more responsibility. You have the power the power is literally vested in you to rid the organization of people who create a toxic environment for others. You have a literal
Yes.
responsibility to take care of the whole and not just, an
Yeah.
individual who's running rampant.
And I want to point out too that it can be hard if you, so in that case, somebody had to come forward, right, to make it known. And I want to point out that I understand that that's an awkward position to be put in, because it's like, oh God, am I just going to be viewed as the tattletale? Am I just, the first thing I want to say is, if you're going to be that person, make sure that you're presenting this. The way that I tell people is that it is a problem, but that you are offering, that you're saying, hey, I just want to make sure that this gets fixed. In other words, you're not going to go in there to your boss and scream and yell at your boss. You're not going to go in there, and like demand immediately that this person be fired. Let them handle it, but go in and say, hey, this is a problem. I see this, and this, we really need help with this. We really need you to fix this, and go to them for help, and go that way. I've seen it handled the other way, where somebody just goes in demanding that someone be immediately fired. That's less well received. So right. I understand it, but it's less well received. So go in and say, hey, we need your help with this. This is a problem, and step up. If somebody's being an asshole, step up and go, no, we're not going to do this. No.
I think with strength comes some responsibility, right? So if you are the person who has the strength and the courage, because it takes courage, obviously, or fearlessness, it's quite different, but it takes courage to go and say to the boss or to HR, in some cases, we have a problem here with this person, and this is why. You have a responsibility to take your receipts, right? So make sure that you have examples, and you can talk about why this behavior is unacceptable, is toxic, is to leave, is fueling low morale, whatever the consequences of it are, and have examples to talk about. And so you have that responsibility to do it properly, because you generally only get like one really good shot to do that.
That's true.
And so you got to prepare and think about how you do that. But I think, to me, the conversation is mostly about how agreeableness. There's a brilliant guy called David Taffet who runs a strategy company called Duke Strat, and he wrote an absolutely amazing article in Fast Company, which was the singularly most impressive articulation of bullies and toxicity in the workplace, and how we have so many organizations and leaders have conflated emotional intelligence with agreeableness. And so we end up with this sort of toxic civility and toxic tolerance, really, of behavior. And to me, a strong leader is somebody who does not tolerate the intolerable, even if they're not facing that themselves personally day to day. They have a responsibility to not tolerate that on behalf of everyone else in their organization.
100%. And I want to take this moment too to also say, leaders, this also means you may lose your job. But that's part of your job. Doing your job can also mean that you lose your job if you're at the wrong kind of organization. I know, because it's happened.
Yes. Yes.
I was the one who got fired, not the asshole. So it does happen.
It difficult, right? That's what makes it difficult, because if you are in a place where that message is not going to be received well, where that behavior is not going to be dealt with, then you have a choice to make.
Yes. And I've chosen to leave organizations that didn't care. It's one of those things too. So whenever you come forward about an asshole, whether it's that he's stealing other people's work, which that happens, and taking credit, whether it's that he's saying inappropriate things, doing inappropriate things, you have to understand that sometimes, because the person is a talented asshole, to your point, Alan, they're not going to get fired because maybe they're a top performer. Maybe they're everybody's BFF. Maybe they're, what the heck ever. And the other thing that happens a lot too, and I want to get your take on this, Alan, because I've seen this a lot in my career, and I'm sure that you have too, are the people who cherry pick who they're going to be the asshole to and who they're not. And so all of these other people are like, well, I'm not having this problem. And so HR automatically goes, oh, it's not real. That's not how it works. If the person is toxic to this person, they need to go. It's not that other person's fault. It's the asshole's fault. And they got to go. And to Jason, who's in the comments, point, those people rarely change. I am with you, Alan, that you should give them that chance. You should do the write-up. You should go through the process. But it's very, very rare that they actually change. So have you seen that? Have you seen that very often?
Have you seen that they change, or
these people that cherry pick? Sorry, I did kind of get off on a tangent. Yeah. People that cherry pick.
Yeah. Well, I know David's difficult, but he's our best sales guy. And, he really knocks it out of the park and the clients love him. And, let's just get through this quarter and then I'll talk to him.
Yep.
No.
I've heard it. I've heard that so many times. No.
Do it now.
Immediately. Immediately.
And by the way, great, but he's not a great performer if he's an asshole and he's creating low morale and he's bullying people and creating a toxic environment, and other people are leaving because of him.
Yes,
that
he's costing you.
That's somebody who's literally a cancer on your organization, right, and destroying it from the inside.
Yes, absolutely.
So, no, this is not a strong performer. Like, part of the criteria for good performance is that you can play nicely in the sandbox with others. This is not rocket science.
Yes, and. Right? BFF. That's not what we're saying here. We're just saying, don't be the jerk. Just don't do that. Don't push others down. Don't do things to make their workplace toxic. That's not acceptable.
No, oftentimes, well, usually I think people who behave this way, there's a lot of insecurity there, right? So it's a way of getting their needs met. They don't have the skills necessarily to do it in a way that is professional. That demonstrates a high level of emotional intelligence. And by the way, people with high EQ, I just want to say this is important. I've seen people score really highly on the EQ assessments, right? So I use EQ assessments a lot in my coaching work. I've seen people score very highly, like sort of almost off the charts on all of the dimensions, and they can be just as dangerous because
sometimes worse,
because they know how to manipulate.
Mm-hmm.
They know how to use their powers of emotional intelligence for, less than noble aims, shall we say. And they can be some of the most political people that we run across. Mm-hmm. And part of the issue is generally that they're also very smart.
Yes.
And because they're smart, they're valuable because they can, do things that other, people cannot do. They're good at relationships outside the organization, where they have something to gain. But anyone who is only good at relationships when they have something to gain, i.e. great on the outside, terrible on the inside, especially with people who are lower down in the organization and then kissing up. That's the classic. That's the classic, because these are people who do have the skills, but choose not to use them with their colleagues internally. That to me is inexcusable.
It is.
That is intolerable. That is the shit that has to stop. And those are the people who have to go.
And it's very toxic. And people don't realize what one bad employee can do. But let me tell you, I've seen it rip apart an organization. Yeah. I really have. I've watched it happen. I've just sat there and gone, well, okay, here we go. And the hardest is when it's an executive. Mm-hmm. That's when it's the hardest, because there is kind of the who do you report them to? There's the how do we deal with it? And I was once in a position to, be there for an HR person, because this was my client. I actually had to fire this client, but she called me, and she would, after I fired them, even she would call me and go, I just don't know what to do. I'm trying to be here for my people. I just don't know what to do. Ultimately, she left because the executive was the one doing drugs in front of people, was the one doing, treating people like dirt, sexually harassing women, and that's just like, come on. And eventually the board got involved, which sometimes that's what you have to do.
Yeah.
And I will tell folks, so for people always go, well, what do I do when it's an executive? You can't do anything. You're just stuck. Wrong. If there's a board, make sure that they know, because trust me, they don't care about that. What they care about is that company, or make sure legal knows. Well, if there is a legal team.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Catherine.
No, go ahead. I was going to say, send it to legal.
Terrible track record this morning. This is why I also think that HR should report to the board.
Yes.
Because, well, what if it's the CEO who's the problem?
Right.
Or a partner in the business. We've seen this happen with that Uber guy. I'm not even going to mention his name. I mean, they ended up making a TV show about him. This stuff makes great television, but in real life it sucks.
It does. It's like with that Tiger King thing.
Watching it on TV because we know that the villain is going to get his or her comeuppance, but like
yes. It's not okay. And like that Tiger King thing, everybody was like, oh, this is so funny and all this. And I was like, I knew those people. It is not funny. It is not funny what went on there. I don't know why you're amused by this. This is not okay.
Full confession, I love watching shows like Succession and Billions and Suits and all these office-based kind of like professional dramas.
But it's fake.
Toxic narcissists and, rampant nepotism and horrible behavior. I mean, I love that shit, like with the best of us, right? I love watching it, but I'm not down with tolerating it for real.
No.
I want it as my entertainment. I don't want it as my day job.
Not real life. Yeah. Not real life. That's not acceptable at all. And it's so funny to me because people always think that there's some level of acceptance. Like one of my favorite things was that I ever heard somebody say was, oh, well, that's just the type of man it takes to be that type of successful. Referring to a man who would grab hold of women, be all up on them, say gross things.
Okay.
So, and I just hold on, whoa. I got it. This one got me. No, you're good, Alan, but this one. So I used to hear this excuse, and it was once said about the man about whom I'm about to tell a story. So I went into a meeting, and there was immediate comment made about my body. And I turned around, and I won't repeat what I said because we do have a professional audience, but I made a very poignant joke about a physical handicap, about a very small part of his anatomy in front of everyone. And I made it very loud. And everybody just kind of looked at me like, oh my gosh, I can't believe she said that. And I'm going, why was that not directed at him? Why wasn't it, oh my God, I can't believe he immediately commented on her body when she walked into the room?
Your response became the target of everyone's attention.
But it was funny. Nothing happened to me.
No.
And he cut it out. He cut it out real quick.
But that's a good example. That's a good example. And I think it illustrates, like you said, nothing happened, right? And this is where our impulses can actually do us a disservice, or a lack of impulse control can do us a disservice. We all want to defend ourselves in situations like that, right?
And I'm not saying I did the right thing. I want to put that out there. I'm just telling the story.
Yeah. And so what this guy said was obviously, inappropriate. You just don't comment on people's bodies, period. End of, right? But you would do yourself a disservice, right, by reacting that way, because then the attention becomes about you and what you said, when he's the problem, right?
Right.
And so then nothing happens because nobody's talking about him anymore. They're talking about what you said back to him. And so, there you are, right? Whereby if you actually kind of like leave the room and go to HR, go speak to the boss, or just don't go to the meeting, then deal with it, separately in the ways that we've discussed in terms of going and saying, okay, here is an example of something that's just not okay. Then you stand more of a chance of actually being able to have that, person dealt with, like sort of, through the chains.
So then older, mature Catherine, when a similar type thing happens.
We've all made mistakes. Yeah. It's kind of.
But you have to learn. You have to learn. And I want to say I've been the leader when something like that happened, and it was one of my team members that was defending herself, and I stood by her and I said, I really don't care what she said. Look what he was doing. I said, she was defending herself. She wouldn't have been saying that, and I kind of went into that. Now, privately, I told her, handle it a little bit better. But I want to say this. I am not against calling out the asshole. So then older, more mature Catherine, something similar happened. I turned around and made a joke, but then it was funny, just a general, like, blowing it off kind of joke, and then I later said, by the way, never make a comment to me like that again. I don't think your wife would appreciate it. And I said it directly to him. And then I handled it later. Yeah. And so I want to say, though, that there's nothing wrong with calling these people out.
No.
There's not even publicly. If they say something to you publicly and you want to shut them down publicly, great, do it. But do it in a way that's not, like to Alan's point, that's not going to make it about you. That's going to keep the focus on them and how gross they were. And just leave it there.
And understand that there are laws in place to protect you against certain types of behavior, like sexual harassment, for instance, right? And I think those things can be, they are generally dealt with quicker when they are discovered, investigated, interrogated, and found to be true. So that's one thing. But there's a lot of toxic behavior that doesn't fall under those sort of banners of legality that don't actually, constitute an environment that could land you in court.
Like a lot of microaggressions. This is a huge problem.
Bullying, etc. Right? Gaslighting.
So for people that are confused about microaggressions, how do you explain them to people?
They're the small insidious comments that people make about an individual's physical presence, their culture, their race, their nationality, their accent, their gender, their sexuality, their gender expression, that are often somewhat passive aggressive.
Right.
And try to be dressed up as like a compliment, but often are not. And sometimes they're just downright aggressive.
I, for instance, heard one time that was speaking to it was a white woman talking to a Black associate, and she walks up to her and goes, "I just love how you people can do that with your hair."
You people.
Yeah. And
Blow your roll. What?
I was like, So I gently pulled her aside and I said, okay, let's talk about this. Let's talk about why that was not appropriate. And I will say this, but microaggressions are tough because, and I see a lot of posts on LinkedIn that are, HR, why aren't you doing something about microaggressions? And you just need to believe people. Well, I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a minute because I feel what they're saying. I'm like, yes, I know exactly why you feel that way. I know exactly why you think that way. I completely understand it. But here's the other side to that. Legally and practically speaking, HR has some limitations. They cannot necessarily write someone up for saying something that was not overt because it could always be, well, they meant it this way or they meant it that way. And, So sometimes, and you also need to be very specific because, for instance, my mother's in HR. We're always talking about things, and she's always and forever getting emails from folks that are saying, this person is insulting me with no examples. You have to give specific examples. For instance, like the one I just said, that young lady, had I not just snatched that white woman off the floor, she could have come to me and said, hey, this woman specifically said to me this.
Yeah.
That's how we're able to deal with it. So if you want help with your microaggressions, that's very valid concern. That's something that you should get help with from HR, but you need to be specific in your complaint and in your documentation. Very, very specific.
I think that is absolutely true. I also think that organizations have a responsibility to train their employees and their leaders specifically, first of all, in what microaggressions are. And so that they understand, they can, if they are in a meeting and they see one employee sort of offer, like, be microaggressive, I don't know if that's the term, towards another employee, then they can call it out themselves without needing to involve anyone else.
Right.
The leaders have to be responsible, because the person who's being targeted, in that, is not necessarily going to be brave enough to speak up, and is likely so upset that they can't think straight, or they can't actually, find the courage in the moment to go and talk about it. And that's where leaders have to catch.
Yes. And the number one question I get asked is what can I do to make sure that my team is inclusive, make sure that my leadership is inclusive? I say that starts way before there's ever an issue, way before there's ever any hiring. Yeah. I said, you need to your point, to train these folks to breed inclusion, to breed a healthy environment to where things are not acceptable, that are jerk behaviors, where you deal with those kinds of things head on, and no matter who it is, get rid of them. When you breed that type of culture, the nonsense doesn't happen so much. Every once in a while it might sneak up, but then you just deal with it and you move on. But the fact that you've prepped for it, that you've built that culture, that you've had those trainings, that will set you up for success. And it also, by the way, is smart. It's not just about ethics. I tell people all the time, this will save you money in lawsuits and turnover and all kinds of other things. There's practical elements as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you have to be really clear about who you are as an organization, as a company. What is your mission? What are your values that underpin that mission, so that people know what to expect and have a right to expect, really, from their leaders. And if there is duplicity and toxicity, and we're saying one thing and doing another, I almost wouldn't mind walking into a toxic environment if, like, toxicity was on the list of values. Like, at least I'd know.
Right.
Like, all right.
Like, just be honest.
But I'm going to get paid shitloads of money, and it's going to be worth it for a year.
Yeah. Okay, and there it is. Like, we just don't care. We want to be the assholes. We want to do that. So just come in here if that's who you are.
But in all seriousness, I think that there are environments that are very difficult, and where certain types of people will thrive.
True.
And they will be surrounded by other people, like them. And there'll be politics and nastiness and microaggressions left and right. It'll be awful, right? But if they're all like that, then just let them have their party. It's like,
yeah, but it's fine.
Party over there. But that obviously is problematic, in the sense that you're going to end up with someone in there who kind of like didn't get the memo. It's like, what the hell am I doing here? This place is awful. And then, but I guess I'm talking out of the world with that one.
No, you're good. It's absolutely true. And there is something to be said for that. And I will say that a lot of times I think that there does need to be some understanding for personality types, because I've seen people at work that will get offended by something that I'm going, that's just, the person didn't say anything rude or do anything rude. Yeah. You just don't like their personality. For instance, I'm a very assertive person. I get along with most people, but every once in a while there's somebody I don't get along with. Oh, well, like I wasn't rude to them. It's just it's what it is, you know?
Yeah.
And so you need to be understanding of that, but never understanding or accepting of someone who is being inappropriate, being ugly, being toxic in any way, shape, or form. So as we wrap up the show, I want to give a quick rundown of how to recognize as a leader when there's something toxic happening, when there's a toxic asshole that you need to get rid of. What are the top 3 signs that you can think of?
Oh, what are the top 3 signs to think of it with a toxic asshole, as you call them? Okay. So, I think you really have to have your ear to the ground so that you can hear what people are really thinking and feeling. And so make sure that you are connected to the folks who report to the people who report to you. And that you have relationship there. At a minimum, you have approachability, openness. You are seen to be someone who they can come and talk to if they have a problem with their boss. And so if you are hearing, rumblings, then you speak directly to the leader, involved, to say, what's going on here? There's, some issue. And I observed something the other day in a meeting that had me concerned about your impulse control or your anger management. That was not cool. Let's talk about that, right? So calling out the behavior, keeping an ear to the ground, so that you are more connected to your employee base. Looking out for the ones that kiss up and kick down. If people are afraid to talk, that is a clear sign that something's up.
Yes.
When people are not talking, something's up. If you are, at a town hall, you're in a meeting and you ask a question out to the group and people just sort of don't say anything.
There's toxicity there.
That's a sign of fear. I'm afraid to speak up. People are afraid to speak up. Well, why is that? Why are they afraid to speak up? People should not be afraid at work.
No.
Period.
No. That's ridiculous. Right? Absolutely not.
There's natural concerns about, being, maybe earlier in your career and not being confident, which is to be expected. But, mid-level, senior level folks not speaking up is a big red flag.
Absolutely. I would 100% agree. And I would say kind of my final tip is if you see the person that is always making jokes and no one's laughing, or if you see a person that everyone literally will like walk around them to get away from them, something's going on there. You should definitely check it out. And then if somebody is always the first to raise their hand for credit for something, watch that person. There's something a little shady going on there. Watch that person. Yeah. And then the final thing I will say is be careful when you approach the asshole, because if it's a new behavior, if the person was great and this is new, please do it with kindness, because there's probably actually something else going on there. But if there's always been an issue, just deal with them and ultimately fire the asshole. And with that, thank you very much for joining us, Alan. And also Max, who's no longer with us, but thank you for jumping on, Max. Oh, he's here. Bye. Bye, Max. And have a happy, wonderful Friday, everybody. Join us again next week. See you soon.
Okay.